I don't even know where to start. Maybe 6 years ago, when my entire life fell apart. Or maybe now, when I've come back to the same town I swore I'd never step foot in again. Either way, this is not a story about revenge. It's a story about regret, bad decisions, and maybe, just maybe, finding a way back. Let me introduce myself. My name's Jake. 6 years ago, I left my wife, Laura, and never looked back. At least, that's what everyone thinks. What really happened is a little more complicated. Laura and I had been married for 4 years. We were that couple everyone assumed would make it, high school sweethearts, college together, the whole meant-to-be fairy tale. And for a while, it was good. Hell, it was great. We had a routine, little inside jokes, and dreams about starting a family. I thought she was happy. But then, things started to change. It was little things at first. She worked late more often. She became glued to her phone, turning it face down whenever I walked by. Her laughter sounded different, like she was trying too hard. And the worst part? The way she looked at me, like I was just there. Not her husband. Not the guy she used to sneak out with as a teenager. Just a presence in the house. I tried to ignore it. I chalked it up to stress, maybe a phase. I even blamed myself. Was I boring? Too predictable? Maybe I wasn't showing her enough affection. Then, I found the messages. I wasn't snooping. I swear, I wasn't. Laura had left her laptop open on the couch, and I just happened to glance at the screen. And there it was, her messages with him. I didn't recognize the number, but I didn't need to. The words were enough. Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you. I think my heart actually stopped. The world got blurry, my stomach twisted, and for a second, I thought I might throw up. I sat there, rereading the messages, hoping I was misunderstanding. Maybe it was a friend joking around. Maybe, God, I don't even know what excuse I was searching for. But the truth was right in front of me. My wife was cheating on me. And just like that, the life I thought we had. It shattered. I don't remember how long I sat there, staring at the screen. It could have been 5 minutes, or it could have been an hour. Time stopped making sense. The words blurred together, twisting into something ugly and irreversible. I wanted to be wrong. I wanted there to be some logical explanation. A misunderstanding. A joke. Maybe some elaborate, innocent reason my wife was telling another man that last night was amazing. But deep down, I knew the truth. I felt it in my gut, that primal instinct when something is just wrong. My hands were shaking when I finally forced myself to scroll up. I wasn't ready, but I had to see it. I had to know how long this had been going on. And there it was. Weeks. Months. I skimmed through the messages, and the more I read, the sicker I felt. They had inside jokes. Pet names. Plans. They had a routine. I wasn't just some oblivious husband getting cheated on, I was the fool in the background while my wife built a second relationship. Then I saw it. A name. Chuck. The name punched me in the gut because I knew exactly who he was. Chuck Harding. A guy I never liked, but tolerated because Laura insisted he was just a friend. We had drinks together. He'd been in our house. He'd shaken my damn hand. And the whole time, he was sleeping with my wife. I clenched my fists so hard my knuckles turned white. My chest burned. My ears rang. I wanted to break something, throw something, scream, anything to get rid of the weight pressing down on me. But instead, I just sat there. Silent. Frozen. How do you even process something like that? 1 second, you're a husband with a future, and the next, you're the punchline to a joke you didn't even know existed. After a while, I forced myself to breathe. I couldn't just sit there drowning in my own thoughts, I needed proof. Screenshots. Evidence. Something to confront her with, so she couldn't twist her way out of it. So I copied everything. Every message, every timestamp, every disgusting emoji. And then I waited. Laura wasn't home yet. She had told me she was working late, and now I had a pretty good idea of where she actually was. That thought alone made me want to punch a hole in the wall, but I needed to stay in control. I sat in our dark living room, waiting for her to walk through the door. And when she finally did, my entire world shifted. She looked normal. No guilt, no hesitation. She smiled at me, kissed my cheek, and asked if I wanted her to make something to eat. I almost laughed. How do you pretend like that? How do you come home to the man you married, knowing you just spent hours tangled up with someone else? How do you kiss him like nothing happened? It took every ounce of self-control not to explode right then and there. I forced myself to play along. I wanted to see how long she could keep up the act. So I asked her about work. She sighed, rolling her eyes. It was exhausting, she said. Non-stop meetings. I'm so tired. I bet she was. I nodded like I believed her. Yeah. What time did you get off? She hesitated. Just for a second. But I caught it. Around 8, she said. But I stayed back to help Claire with some reports. You know how she always falls behind. Lie. A bold-faced lie. I stared at her, feeling something inside me crack. The woman standing in front of me wasn't the girl I fell in love with. This was a stranger. A liar. Someone capable of betraying me and then standing in our kitchen, laughing at some dumb joke I made, like we were just another happy couple. I couldn't do it anymore. I pulled out my phone, opened the screenshots, and slid it across the counter toward her. Her smile faded the second she saw the screen. Silence. Then, a sharp inhale. Jake, No, my voice came out cold. Dead. I didn't even recognize it. Don't. Just don't. Her face drained of color. She looked at me, then back at the messages, and for the first time, she looked afraid. Not because she thought I would hurt her, I never would, but because she knew. She was caught. And there was no way out of this. You know how people talk about those defining moments in life? The ones where time slows down, your pulse pounds in your ears, and you realize that nothing will ever be the same. This was one of those moments. Laura just stood there, staring at my phone like it was a loaded gun. Her fingers twitched like she wanted to reach for it, maybe to delete the messages, as if that would somehow erase the truth. But the truth was right there, in black and white. You have nothing to say? I asked. My voice was eerily calm, which made the tension even worse. She swallowed hard. Jake. I can explain. Explain. Explain what, exactly? How she had been sneaking around with Chuck for months. How she kissed me after being with him. How she smiled in my face every day while living a double life. I pushed back from the counter, folding my arms. Go ahead. Explain. She opened her mouth, then shut it. Her brain was scrambling for an excuse, a way to twist this, to soften the blow. I watched as emotions flickered across her face, shock, guilt, panic. But not remorse. And that's when I knew. She wasn't sorry she cheated. She was sorry she got caught. Jake, she exhaled sharply and ran a hand through her hair. It just happened. I scoffed. It just happened. Not like that, she said quickly. I mean, it wasn't planned. I didn't mean for this to happen. That made my blood boil. Oh, so what? You tripped and accidentally landed on Chuck's D***K. She winced, her eyes flashing with something, anger? Embarrassment? Probably both. That's not fair. Not fair. I laughed bitterly. Tell me, Laura, what part of this is fair? The part where my wife sneaks around behind my back? Or the part where she looks me in the eyes and lies to my face? She had the nerve to look offended. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. She took a shaky breath and finally looked at me, really looked at me. I never wanted to hurt you, Jake. Yeah. Well, congrats. You did. Silence. For a second, I thought maybe she'd break down, maybe she'd beg me to forgive her. Maybe I wanted her to. But she just stood there, chewing on her bottom lip, thinking. I realized then that she wasn't searching for the right words, she was searching for an escape. So I made it easy for her. Just tell me the truth, I said, my voice quieter now. How long? She hesitated. A few months. I clenched my jaw. I already knew the answer, but hearing her say it made my stomach twist. And was it just sex? I asked. Or were you in love with him? She flinched. That tiny movement told me everything I needed to know. I felt something inside me snap. You love him, I said, more to myself than to her. No, she started, but I shook my head. Don't lie to me again, Laura. Her lips parted like she wanted to argue, but she didn't. Instead, she wrapped her arms around herself like she was cold. Like she was the victim. I wanted to be angry. I should have been angry. But all I felt was empty. You need to leave, I said. Her eyes widened. Jake. No, I shook my head, stepping back like she was something toxic. I can't even look at you right now. She swallowed. Where am I supposed to go? I laughed. Actually laughed. Seriously? You have Chuck, don't you? Go to him. That hit her like a slap. For the first time, I saw her eyes water. But I was done. I turned away, grabbed my car keys, and walked out the door. And just like that, my marriage was over. I don't remember much about that night after I walked out. I just drove. I didn't have a destination, didn't even realize where I was going until I pulled into an empty parking lot behind some strip mall. I turned off the car, gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, and just sat there. The silence felt crushing. Like if I let it, it would swallow me whole. I should have felt relief. I'd done what any sane man would do, confronted my cheating wife, told her to leave, walked away. That's what you're supposed to do in situations like this, right? So why did I feel like my chest was caving in? Why did I feel like I just lost something I could never get back? Maybe it was because I hadn't just lost my wife. I'd lost my entire reality. 6 years. That's how long I'd built a life with Laura. 6 years of inside jokes, weekend getaways, arguing over what to watch on Netflix. 6 years of thinking she was my person, the one I'd grow old with. And in one night, it was gone. I leaned my head back against the seat, exhaling slowly. My hands were still shaking. My whole body felt off. Like I wasn't fully there, like none of this was really happening. Then my phone buzzed. For a second, I thought it was Laura, but when I checked the screen, it was my sister, Kate. I hesitated, then answered. Yeah. Where are you? Her voice was sharp with worry. I sighed. I'm fine. Jake. I closed my eyes. I don't know. Somewhere. She was quiet for a second. She told me. My stomach tightened. Told you what? Everything. A pause. She called me sobbing, saying you kicked her out. I let out a bitter laugh. Damn right, I did. Jake, Kate's voice softened. Are you okay? No. I wasn't. But I couldn't say that. I will be, I muttered instead. Kate exhaled. Listen, I'm not gonna say she doesn't deserve this. She does. But, what now? I stared at the ceiling of my car. I don't know. She's at Mom's, Kate said carefully. She didn't know where else to go. I frowned. Mom let her in. She didn't know what was going on, Kate said. Laura just showed up crying, and you know how Mom is. Yeah. I did. My mom was the kind of woman who took people in first and asked questions later. Does she know now? I asked. Kate hesitated. Not all of it. That made my jaw clench. Of course. Laura wasn't the type to own up to things. If she called Kate crying, it wasn't because she was confessing, she was spinning a version of the truth that made her look like the victim. She let everyone think I just left her, I said quietly, realization sinking in. What? She never told anyone the truth, did she? I asked. When I left, she let everyone think I abandoned her. Kate was silent. That was all the confirmation I needed. I laughed under my breath, shaking my head. Unbelievable. Jake, I gotta go. I hung up before she could say anything else. I sat there in the dark, gripping my phone, feeling something I couldn't quite name. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was humiliation. For 6 years, people had looked at me like I was a selfish bastard who walked out on his wife. They pitied Laura. They whispered about how I changed and how she must have been so heartbroken. And she let them. She let them believe I was the villain while she played the grieving wife. I took a deep breath, shoving my phone into my pocket. I wasn't going to let that slide. I don't remember driving home. 1 second, I was in that dark parking lot, and the next, I was standing in my living room, staring at the life Laura and I built together. The photos on the wall. The throw blanket she insisted we buy last fall. Her stupid candles that always smelled like vanilla and cinnamon. It hit me all over again, this wasn't just my house. It was ours. Except now, it wasn't. She was gone. And this place? It felt empty in a way I couldn't explain. I sat down heavily on the couch, pressing my palms against my face. My mind kept replaying everything. The messages. The confrontation. The way Laura had looked at me when she realized she was caught, like she was trapped, not sorry. And then there was the part that made my stomach twist. She let people think I abandoned her. For 6 years, she walked around with that lie. Played the part. And I never bothered to correct it because I wasn't there to see it unfold. I thought leaving was enough, but now I realized, she didn't just betray me in private. She let the whole world believe I was the bad guy. My phone buzzed again. Kate, I know you're pissed. But don't do anything stupid. I exhaled sharply. Stupid. Right. Because confronting Laura's lies would make me the problem, wouldn't it? I didn't answer. Instead, I got up, walked over to the bookshelf, and grabbed the one thing I hadn't touched in years, our marriage certificate. And that's when I noticed something. I never signed divorce papers. I froze. Stared at the certificate, flipping through the folder, waiting to see some official paperwork confirming the end of our marriage. Nothing. My chest tightened. I had assumed, it had been 6 years. Surely, she had filed. Right? But as I stood there, realization crept in. Laura and I were still legally married. I sat back down, running a hand through my hair. This didn't make sense. She had moved on. Hell, for all I knew, she was with Chuck the whole time after I left. Why wouldn't she divorce me? Then, a sickening thought hit me. What if she didn't want the divorce? What if keeping my last name, keeping that title of abandoned wife worked in her favor? What if, for the last 6 years, she had been using my silence as a weapon? I clenched my jaw. No. No more. I picked up my phone and scrolled until I found the number I never thought I'd have to call again. It rang twice before she answered. Jake. Laura's voice was thick, like she had been crying. Maybe she had. I didn't care. Why didn't you file for divorce? I asked, skipping the pleasantries. Silence. Then, a quiet inhale. I don't know. Bullshit. My voice was cold. You had 6 years, Laura. You could have moved on. Hell, I assumed you did. So why didn't you sign the damn papers? She hesitated. I just, never got around to it. A hollow laugh escaped me. Never got around to it. Jake, she exhaled. I don't know, okay. Maybe I thought you'd come back. I stilled. Come back. I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. She let out a broken laugh. I know. It's stupid. But for a while, I thought you would. That maybe we just needed time apart. I pinched the bridge of my nose, trying to keep my temper in check. Laura, you cheated on me. I know. Her voice cracked. And I was awful. I know that. But Jake, you just left. You never even let me explain. I snapped. Explain what? That you didn't mean for it to happen. That it was a mistake. That you never wanted to hurt me. My voice was sharp, cutting. You didn't just cheat, Laura. You let everyone think I walked out on you. And you never corrected them. Silence. Then, softly, I didn't know how. I closed my eyes. I wanted to yell, to tell her how much she had destroyed me. But what was the point? I took a deep breath. Here's what's going to happen. I'm getting a lawyer. You're signing the divorce papers. And then, you're going to tell the truth. I could hear her swallow. The truth? Yes, I said firmly. I'm done being your villain, Laura. She didn't answer right away. When she finally did, her voice was small. Okay. I hung up. And for the first time in 6 years, I felt like I was finally taking back my life. After I hung up, I just sat there, staring at the wall. I should have felt relieved. I finally said what needed to be said. I finally put her in a position where she had to own up to her mistakes. So why did I feel like I was still choking on 6 years of silence? I needed air. Grabbing my keys, I left the house and started driving again, no destination in mind. The roads were mostly empty, streetlights blurring past as I let my thoughts run wild. Would Laura actually tell the truth? Would she stand in front of our families, our friends, hell, the entire town, and admit that she was the one who ruined our marriage? I doubted it. People like her didn't just wake up one day and decide to be honest. She would try to spin it, make it softer, frame it in a way that still made me look like I had some part in it. Maybe she'd tell people we grew apart. That I was emotionally unavailable. It didn't matter. I was done letting her lies define me. I pulled into a gas station, not because I needed fuel, but because I needed a break. Something to stop my brain from circling the same drain over and over. I got out, bought a bottle of water, and stood outside, leaning against my car. And then I heard it. Jake. I turned. Kate. She was getting out of her own car, her expression unreadable. I sighed. You following me now? She shut the door and walked over, crossing her arms. No. Just figured you'd be out here somewhere. I took a sip of water. Let me guess. You talked to her. Kate nodded. Yeah. And? She hesitated. She's a mess. I huffed a laugh. Good. Kate frowned. Jake, I know you're angry. Angry? I cut in, lowering the bottle. Kate, she destroyed my life. She made me the bad guy in a story she wrote. And you're telling me she's upset? Good. She should be. Kate sighed, rubbing her temples. I'm not saying she doesn't deserve it. I'm just saying. I don't think she ever thought this day would come. That makes two of us. She hesitated again, then glanced at me. Are you really gonna go through with it? What? The divorce? I scoffed. Hell yes. No, she said carefully. I mean making her tell the truth. I clenched my jaw. Yes. Kate studied me for a moment. And if she doesn't? I exhaled slowly. Then I'll do it myself. Kate looked at me for a long time, then nodded. All right. That surprised me. I expected her to argue, to tell me to just let it go, to move on. All right? I repeated. Yeah. She shrugged. You deserve that much. A lump formed in my throat. Kate and I had always been close, but she had also been one of the people who never questioned Laura's version of the story. She wasn't cruel about it, but I could tell, she had believed it, at least a little. And now? Now she knew the truth. Thanks, I muttered. She smiled sadly. Just don't burn the whole town down when you do it, okay? I smirked. No promises. Kate laughed, shaking her head. Then her face turned serious. You're really done with her, aren't you? I nodded. Yeah. I am. And for the first time in 6 years, I actually meant it. The next morning, I woke up with a clear head for the first time in years. I had a plan. I was going to get the divorce started, meet with a lawyer, and once the paperwork was in motion, I'd make sure everyone knew the truth. No more letting Laura's version of the story control my life. No more being the guy who left his poor wife behind. But first, I needed coffee. I threw on a hoodie, grabbed my keys, and drove to the one place I hadn't been in years, Joe's Cafe. Joe's was a small, old-school diner. The kind of place where you knew everyone and everyone knew you. Which meant, as soon as I walked in, heads turned. People recognized me. I could see it in their faces, the subtle double takes, the whispers. Like I was some ghost they didn't expect to see again. I ignored them and walked straight to the counter. The barista, a girl I didn't recognize, gave me a polite but cautious smile. What can I get you? Before I could answer, another voice cut in. Well, well. Look what the wind dragged back in. I turned. And there he was. Chuck Harding. The man who had slept with my wife. The man who had helped her destroy our marriage. The man I hadn't seen since the day I walked away from everything. And now, here he was, standing a few feet away, looking at me like I was some wild animal that had wandered into his territory. I studied him. He looked older. More tired. His hair had thinned out, and there was a little extra weight around his gut. But that smug expression. That hadn't changed. I didn't react. I just turned back to the barista. Large black coffee. Chuck laughed under his breath. Not even a hello. I didn't answer. The barista, clearly uncomfortable, hurried to make my drink. Chuck took a step closer. Come on, man. No hard feelings, right? I finally looked at him. Are you serious? He smirked. It's been 6 years. Water under the bridge, don't you think? I let out a slow breath, trying to keep my temper in check. Is that what you tell yourself? Chuck shrugged. Look, I get it. You were pissed. But things happen. People grow apart. He tilted his head. She told me you just up and left. Guess that wasn't the whole truth, huh? I clenched my jaw. He smirked. You know, Laura and I cut him off. I don't give a shit. He blinked. What? I stepped closer, lowering my voice. I don't care what you and Laura did. I don't care how you justify it. I don't care about you. I leaned in slightly. You're nothing, Chuck. The smirk faltered. For the first time, I saw something flicker in his eyes, doubt. I didn't wait for him to respond. The barista slid my coffee across the counter, and I grabbed it, tossing a bill on the counter before turning to leave. But just as I reached the door, Chuck muttered, "You're still bitter." I stopped. Slowly, I turned back around. The diner had gone quiet. People were watching. Listening. Chuck smirked again, clearly enjoying the attention. That's what this is, isn't it? He spread his hands. I get it, man. You got left behind. And now you're back, trying to make up for lost time. I stared at him. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I laughed. Not an angry laugh. Not bitter. Just, amused. Chuck, I said, shaking my head, you actually think you won, don't you? His smirk wavered. You think you got the girl, got the life, got one over on me. I took a sip of my coffee, letting the silence stretch. So tell me, if you won, why are you standing here, trying so damn hard to convince me? Chuck's face darkened. I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked out the door, leaving him standing there, speechless. And for the first time in years, I felt like I had the upper hand. Walking out of that diner felt like closing a chapter one didn't even realize I was still stuck in. For years, I had imagined this moment, seeing Chuck again, maybe even throwing a punch, saying something that would finally even the score. But now I saw him for what he really was. Pathetic. He wanted me to be bitter. He wanted me to still be that broken guy who left town with nothing but a duffel bag and a shattered heart. But I wasn't that guy anymore. I sipped my coffee as I walked to my car, replaying the interaction in my head. The way Chuck smirked. The way it vanished the second he realized I wasn't playing his game. The guy thought he had won. But if that were true, why was he still so hung up on me? As I got in my car, my phone buzzed. Mom, come over when you can. I sighed. Of course. Laura must have gotten to her. I debated ignoring it, but I knew better. If I didn't show up, she'd just keep calling. So I started the car and headed to my childhood home. 15 minutes later, I pulled into the driveway. The second I stepped inside, I was hit with the smell of fresh coffee and the feeling of nostalgia. Everything was the same. The old wooden furniture. The framed pictures lining the walls, except now, any trace of Laura was gone. Mom sat at the kitchen table, waiting for me. She didn't say anything at first, just studied me like she was trying to read me. Then she sighed. Jake. I sat across from her. I know. Laura was here. She nodded. And you spoke to Kate? Yeah. Mom exhaled slowly, rubbing her temples. She told me everything. Or, at least, as much as she was willing to say through tears. I huffed. Of course she cried. Mom gave me a look. Jake. What? I shrugged. It's what she does. Plays the victim. Mom was quiet for a moment, then shook her head. I just don't understand. Why didn't you tell us? I clenched my jaw. Because I wanted to be done with it. I wanted to walk away and never have to think about it again. She frowned. That's not how these things work. I let out a bitter laugh. Yeah, I figured that out. She reached across the table, resting a hand on mine. You didn't deserve what happened to you. I swallowed hard. Those words, hearing them from her, felt heavier than I expected. I know, I said quietly. She studied me. So, what happens now? I leaned back. Now I get a divorce. Officially. Mom nodded slowly, then hesitated. And what about everything else? I knew what she meant. The truth. The people who had whispered behind my back for years. The damage Laura's lies had done. I'm not letting her control the narrative anymore, I said firmly. People can believe what they want, but I'm not staying quiet. Mom smiled, just a little. Good. That surprised me. You agree? She chuckled. Jake, I might be your mother, but I'm not blind. I saw what people said about you. I saw how they treated you. And I'll admit. I wondered. But now? She shook her head. You deserve the truth to be out there. Just don't let it consume you. I nodded, standing up. I won't. Mom reached for my hand before I could leave. Jake. I looked at her. She squeezed my fingers gently. I'm proud of you. Something in my chest tightened. I swallowed the lump in my throat, gave her a small nod, and walked out the door. This wasn't over yet. By the time I got back home, I had already made up my mind. It was time to call a lawyer. I wasn't going to let this drag on. I wasn't going to let Laura find some excuse to delay the divorce or manipulate her way into making me feel guilty. I was done playing that game. So I did what I should have done years ago. I sat down, pulled up my laptop and started searching for divorce attorneys in town. I wasn't expecting many options, our town wasn't exactly a legal hotspot, but I found a guy named David Whitmore. The reviews were solid, and more importantly, he specialized in high-conflict divorces. Seemed fitting. I dialed his office. After a few rings, a receptionist picked up. Whitmore and Associates, how can I help you? I'd like to schedule a consultation with David, I said. As soon as possible. There was a pause. Are you looking to initiate a divorce, or? Yes. Another pause. All right, let me check his availability. I heard the faint clicking of a keyboard. The earliest we can fit you in is Thursday at 10 a.m. Perfect. She took down my details, confirmed the appointment, and that was it. The wheels were officially in motion. I hung up and exhaled. One step closer. The next day, I got a text from Kate. Kate, Laura wants to talk. I stared at the message for a long time. I could ignore it. I could block her number, refuse to engage, and wait for the divorce process to handle everything. But I knew Laura. She wasn't going to just fade into the background. And truth be told, a part of me wanted to hear what she had to say. Not because I wanted closure, I had already made peace with what happened, but because I wanted to see if she was finally capable of telling the truth. So I replied. Me, where? A few minutes later, Kate texted back. Kate, she's at her sister's place. Asked if you could meet her there. I sighed. Of course. Laura's sister, Michelle, had always been fiercely protective of her. If Laura wanted a controlled environment for this conversation, Michelle's house was the perfect place. Still, I wasn't backing down. Me, fine. I'll be there in an hour. An hour later, I was standing outside Michelle's house, debating whether I should just turn around and leave. But I didn't. Instead, I knocked. The door opened almost immediately, like they had been waiting. Michelle stood there, arms crossed, her expression guarded. Jake, she said. Michelle. She hesitated, then stepped aside. She's in the living room. I walked in, and there she was. Laura. She looked different. Not physically, she was still the same woman I married, but there was something in her expression I hadn't seen before. She looked small. Like the weight of everything had finally caught up to her. I didn't say anything. Just walked in and sat down across from her. She swallowed hard. Thanks for coming. I leaned back. Didn't come for you. I came for the truth. Laura winced. Jake. I tilted my head. Go ahead. Say whatever you need to say. She took a deep breath. I know I hurt you. I didn't respond. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't even expect it. But I need you to know. I wasn't trying to ruin your life. Her voice wavered. I was just lost. I clenched my jaw. That's not an excuse. She nodded quickly. I know. I know it's not. But she exhaled sharply. I was scared. When you left, I didn't know how to handle it. I panicked. People started asking questions, and I didn't correct them. I let them think what they wanted. I narrowed my eyes. You let them think I was the one who walked away. Tears welled up in her eyes. I know. And I was wrong. I studied her. Why now? She blinked. What? Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Why not 6 years ago? Why not when you saw how people treated me? She looked down at her hands. Because I thought you weren't coming back. I scoffed. So that makes it okay? No, she whispered. It doesn't. I thought if I let people believe what they wanted, it would hurt less. For who? I snapped. She flinched. I ran a hand down my face. You're only doing this now because you don't have a choice. Because I backed you into a corner. Laura swallowed hard. I don't want you to hate me. I exhaled slowly. I don't. Her eyes widened slightly, like she wasn't expecting that. I don't hate you, Laura, I repeated. But I don't love you either. And I sure as hell don't owe you anything. Tears slipped down her cheeks. Jake. I stood up. I'll send the divorce papers. Sign them. She wiped at her face. I will. I nodded once, then turned and walked out. And just like that, I closed the door on us for good. Walking out of Michelle's house felt like shaking off 6 years of dead weight. I had finally heard Laura admit the truth, not just about cheating, but about everything she let people believe. And while it didn't erase what happened, it meant something. It meant I wasn't crazy for feeling like I'd been carrying the weight of her lies for years. But there was still one last thing to do. I needed to set the record straight. I wasn't going to make some dramatic public announcement. I didn't need to air my dirty laundry in a Facebook post or go door to door telling people what really happened. But I was done letting the whispers, the rumors, and the sideways looks define me. So I went to the one place where those stories had started, the bar. It was early evening when I walked into Benny's taproom. The same bar where I had spent my last night in town 6 years ago, drinking until I was numb, trying to escape the pain of knowing my wife had been with another man. And just like back then, the place was full of familiar faces. People who had judged me. People who had pitted Laura. People who had never known the truth. The second I stepped inside, I felt the eyes on me. The stolen glances. The quiet murmurs. It was like stepping onto a stage where everyone had already written the script, and I was still playing the villain. Fine. Time to rewrite the damn story. I walked up to the bar, nodding at Benny, the owner, who gave me a look that was somewhere between surprise and curiosity. Didn't think I'd see you back here, he said, pouring a drink for someone. Yeah, well. Thought it was time. Benny wiped his hands on a towel, then leaned on the bar. People been talking since you got back. I smirked. I bet. You gonna let them keep guessing, or you gonna say your piece? I exhaled. I think it's time. Benny nodded toward the corner booth. Then you might want to start with them. I followed his gaze and immediately saw what he meant. Sitting in the booth were three guys I used to call friends. Mark, Jason, and Eric. Guys I used to shoot pool with, grab beers with, talk about work and life with. Guys who had turned their backs on me the second I left. I grabbed my drink, squared my shoulders, and walked over. The conversation at the table slowed as they noticed me. Mark was the first to speak. Well, look who it is. Jason leaned back in his seat. The legend himself. Eric, always the quieter one, just watched me carefully. I set my drink down. Mind if I sit? Mark raised an eyebrow. That depends. You finally here to tell us why you walked out on Laura? There it was. The same old story. I smirked. Funny. That's not what she told me last night. That got their attention. Jason frowned. What are you talking about? I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. You ever wonder why Laura never remarried? Why she never actually filed for divorce? Mark scoffed. Because she was heartbroken, man. She cheated on me. Silence. Eric was the first to react. His eyes flickered with something, doubt. Realization. I wasn't sure. Jason let out a low breath. Wait. What? She cheated, I repeated, my voice even. And when I found out, I left. I didn't walk out on her. I didn't abandon her. I left because I found messages, months' worth, between her and Chuck. Eric rubbed a hand over his face. Jesus. Mark shook his head. Bullshit. If that were true, why didn't she say anything? Why let people think you just left? I let out a humorless laugh. Because it was easier. Because being the victim got her sympathy. I took a sip of my drink, letting them absorb it. She admitted it last night. Jason let out a slow exhale. Damn. I sat back. You still think I'm the bad guy? None of them answered. Good. I drained the rest of my drink and stood up. See you around, boys. As I walked away, I heard Jason mutter, shit. Mark, ever the stubborn one, muttered something I didn't quite catch. But Eric? Eric said, we should have asked more questions. Damn right. I walked out of that bar feeling lighter than I had in years. The truth was finally out. And I was finally free. I didn't expect anything to change overnight. People don't just wake up and decide to rewrite history because of one conversation in a bar. But I had planted the seed. And by morning, it was already spreading. I stopped by Joe's Cafe again for coffee, and this time, the reaction was different. Less staring. Less whispering. More, curiosity. Even Joe himself, an old guy who had owned this place since before I was born, gave me a long, considering look before pouring my coffee. You know, he said, sliding the cup toward me, I always thought there was more to the story. I raised an eyebrow. Yeah. He nodded. You don't just up and leave without a damn good reason. But Laura? She played her part well. I exhaled through my nose. She always did. Joe leaned on the counter, lowering his voice. Words getting around. I wasn't surprised. This town ran on gossip faster than it did electricity. Guess I should have spoken up sooner, I muttered. Joe shrugged. Maybe. But sometimes, letting people assume things says more about them than it does about you. I let that sit for a second, then took a sip of my coffee. You ever think about being a therapist? He chuckled. Nah. Too much bullshit. Coffee's easier. Fair enough. I was about to pay and leave and the last person I wanted to see walked through the door. Chuck. Of course. The second he spotted me, I saw the hesitation. The moment of uncertainty. Good. The man had spent 6 years walking around this town like he'd gotten away with something. Now he knew people were talking. He straightened his shoulders and walked to the counter, acting like I wasn't there. Coffee. Black. Joe didn't move. Instead, he crossed his arms and gave Chuck a long, unimpressed look. You gonna pay for Jake's too? Since, you kinda owe him one. Chuck's jaw tensed. What the hell does that mean? Joe smirked. It means people talk, Chuck. And from what I hear, you don't come out looking too good. Chuck's hands clenched at his sides. This is bullshit. Joe just shrugged. Call it what you want. Chuck turned to me then, eyes burning. You think you're real clever, huh? I met his gaze without flinching. I think I finally stopped letting you win. His nostrils flared. Nobody gives a shit about the past, man. I leaned back against the counter. Yeah. Then why are you so pissed? He opened his mouth, then closed it. His fists clenched like he wanted to throw a punch. I almost wanted him to. Because here's the thing, Chuck had gotten away with what he did for years. And now, for the first time, people were seeing him for what he really was. Not the guy who won anything. Just some asshole who thought betrayal came without consequences. Joe chuckled under his breath. You still want that coffee, Chuck? Chuck muttered something under his breath, then turned and stormed out the door. The second he was gone, Joe shook his head. Damn. I really wanted to see him buy your coffee. I smirked. Maybe next time. Joe just laughed. Yeah. Maybe. I left the cafe feeling lighter than I had in years. Chuck knew. Laura knew. The truth was out. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had won. I thought that would be the end of it. I had said my piece. I had put the truth out there. Chuck was fuming, Laura was drowning in her own guilt, and I was finally free of the weight I had carried for 6 years. But of course, it wasn't that simple. Because 2 days later, Laura showed up at my house. I opened the door, fully prepared to tell her to leave, but the second I saw her face, I knew something was different. She wasn't angry. She wasn't crying. She just looked defeated. Can I come in? She asked softly. I crossed my arms. Why? She hesitated. Because I think it's time you hear the whole truth. That caught me off guard. For years, I thought I had already heard enough. That the truth was simple, she cheated, she lied, and I left. But something in her voice told me there was more. I stepped aside, letting her in. She walked past me, pausing in the living room. You haven't changed much, she murmured, looking around. I ignored the nostalgia in her voice. Say what you came to say, Laura. She turned to face me. You were right. I raised an eyebrow. About what? She swallowed. About why I never filed for divorce. I clenched my jaw. You said you thought I'd come back. That was part of it, she admitted. But the real reason? She let out a shaky breath. I was ashamed. I laughed under my breath. Ashamed? Of what? You seem just fine letting everyone believe I abandoned you. Her face crumpled. I know. And it was wrong. But Jake. I didn't just lose you that day. I frowned. What are you talking about? She hesitated. After you left, I thought. I thought Chuck and I would make it work. That maybe it wasn't a mistake. I scoffed. And she let out a bitter laugh. And it was a mistake. The worst one I ever made. I stayed silent. Laura's hands clenched at her sides. Chuck wasn't who I thought he was. The second you were gone, he changed. He wasn't charming anymore. He wasn't sweet. He was possessive. Controlling. I tilted my head. So what, you want me to feel sorry for you? She shook her head quickly. No. I don't deserve that. But I need you to know, I didn't just lose my husband that day. I lost everything. Her voice wavered, but she kept going. People pitied me, Jake. But nobody respected me. They saw me as the poor abandoned wife, and I let them believe it because the truth was worse. The truth was that I had ruined everything for someone who never actually cared about me. She looked at me then, eyes shining with something I hadn't seen in years, regret. Real, unfiltered regret. I lost you, she whispered. And I lost myself. Silence filled the room. I didn't know what to say. For years, I had imagined what it would feel like to hear her say those words. But now that she had, I just felt tired. Finally, I exhaled. Laura. She met my eyes. I'm sorry that happened to you, I said evenly. But it doesn't change what you did to me. She nodded slowly. I know. And it doesn't mean we can ever go back. Her lip trembled, but she smiled weakly. I didn't come here to ask for that. I studied her. Then why did you? She let out a slow breath. Because I wanted you to know that, you weren't the only one who paid the price for what I did. I searched her face, looking for any sign of manipulation, but for once, I didn't see any. She wasn't trying to guilt me. She wasn't looking for redemption. She just wanted me to know. And maybe that was enough. I nodded. Then I guess this is it. She gave me a sad smile. Yeah. I guess it is. Laura turned toward the door, but before she left, she paused. For what it's worth, she said softly, I really did love you, Jake. I didn't respond. Because once upon a time, I might have believed that. But love doesn't destroy people. And whatever we had, it was long gone. The door closed behind her, and I stood there, letting the silence settle. For the first time in 6 years, I felt like I could finally move forward. After Laura left, I expected to feel something. Closure. Relief. Maybe even some twisted form of satisfaction. But all I felt was exhausted. For years, I had carried the weight of what happened between us. The betrayal. The humiliation. The silence. And now, after all this time, the truth was finally out. Laura had admitted her guilt, the town was starting to put the pieces together, and I had nothing left to say. So why did it still feel like there was unfinished business? I sat on the couch, rubbing my temples, when my phone buzzed. Kate. I sighed before answering. Yeah. You okay? She asked immediately. I let out a dry chuckle. Which part are you asking about? She hesitated. I heard she came to see you. Of course, she had. This town didn't keep secrets for long. Yeah, I said. We talked. Kate was quiet for a moment. And nothing. She told me her side of things. That's it. She told you about Chuck. I clenched my jaw. Yeah. Kate exhaled. I can't say I'm surprised. He was always a piece of shit. That was putting it lightly. I leaned back on the couch, staring at the ceiling. It doesn't change anything. No, she agreed. But it explains a lot. Did it, though? Did it explain why Laura had been willing to throw away our marriage? Why she had lied for years instead of just owning up to what she did. Maybe. But it didn't erase what she did to me. I think I'm finally done, I said quietly. Kate's voice softened. Yeah. Yeah. For the first time since this whole thing started, I meant it. She let out a small laugh. You know, I really thought you were gonna set the whole town on fire when you came back. I smirked. So did I. But instead, she continued, you handled it. And you walked away. I let that sink in. For so long, I thought I needed revenge. That I needed some kind of big moment where everyone in town would see Laura and Chuck for who they really were. But the truth had a way of surfacing on its own. And now? I didn't need to fight anymore. It was over. Proud of you, little brother, Kate said. I smiled. Thanks, Kate. She hesitated, then added, so, now what? Now what? That was the real question, wasn't it? For 6 years, I had let this betrayal define me. I left town because of it. I kept my head down because of it. I let it shape who I was. And now? Now I was free. I don't know, I admitted. But for the first time in a long time. I get to figure that out. Kate chuckled. Well, whatever it is, just don't disappear again, okay? I won't, I promised. And this time, I meant that, too. The next morning, I woke up with an unfamiliar feeling. Peace. For years, I had carried anger, resentment, and regret like they were stitched into my skin. But now? Now they weren't mine to carry anymore. I had said what needed to be said. I had done what I needed to do. And for the first time in 6 years, I wasn't looking back. I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat on the porch, and just let myself exist. No tension in my chest. No voice in the back of my head replaying old conversations. Just me. And then, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen. Mom. I hesitated, then answered. Hey. You sound calm, she said, a little surprised. I smirked. That's because I am. She let out a small laugh. Well, I'm glad to hear that. Then, after a pause, I ran into Laura. I took a slow sip of my coffee. Yeah. She looked different. I exhaled. Yeah. She's been doing a lot of thinking. Mom hummed like she wasn't sure what to make of that. She told me she's signing the papers today. Good. I'm glad, I said simply. Mom hesitated again. She also told me she's leaving town. That surprised me. I hadn't expected her to stay forever, but I figured she'd try to rebuild her life here, now that the truth was out. She said she needs a fresh start, Mom continued. Somewhere new, where she's not just Laura, the abandoned wife. I sat with that for a second. It made sense. For years, Laura had lived in her lie. She had built her whole identity around being the woman who was left behind. Now that people knew the truth, what did she have left? I think that's for the best, I admitted. Mom sighed. I do too. Then her voice softened. Are you okay? I smiled a little. Yeah, Mom. I really am. She let out a relieved breath. Good. You deserve to be. We talked for a little while longer before hanging up. And just like that, it was done. The last loose end had tied itself off. Laura was leaving. Chuck had been exposed. And I finally had my life back. I finished my coffee, stood up, and stretched. For the first time in years, I had no baggage. No lingering ghosts. Just an open road ahead. And damn, it felt good. I always thought closure would come with some big moment. Maybe a dramatic confrontation. Maybe some grand realization. Maybe a perfect one-liner that would make everything feel settled. But in the end, closure wasn't about Laura. It wasn't about Chuck. It was about me. A week after our last conversation, I got a text from Laura. "Laura, papers are signed. It's done." That was it. No long message. No parting words. Just a quiet acknowledgement that our story had officially ended. I stared at the message for a moment before replying. "Me, take care, Laura." And that was it. No anger. No bitterness. Just, the end. That evening, I found myself driving with no real destination. It wasn't like when I left town all those years ago, running from something. This was different. This was freedom. At some point, I ended up at a small overlook just outside town, the kind of place I used to go when I needed to clear my head. I stepped out of the car, leaned against the hood, and just breathed. The sky was clear. The air was cool. And for the first time in 6 years, I wasn't looking backward. I wasn't the guy who got cheated on. I wasn't the guy who left. I wasn't the guy who carried someone else's shame. I was just me. I didn't know what was next. Maybe I'd stay in town for a while. Maybe I'd leave and start fresh somewhere else. But whatever I did, it would be my choice. Not Laura's. Not the town's. Mine. I pulled out my phone and sent a single text to Kate. "Me, I think I'm finally free." A few moments later, she replied. "Kate, took you long enough." I laughed under my breath. Yeah. Maybe it did. But sometimes, the best things take time. And now. I had all the time in the world.